Good evening. I'd like to call the Wednesday, March 9th meeting of the Financial Planning Committee to order. It's past the hour of 6 o'clock. First order of business tonight is the approval of minutes from last meeting. I've read them. Entertain a motion?
Motion to approve.
Seconded.
Second. Any discussion?
I have one question. John, if I could.
Yes.
And I guess it's just a clarity question now that I actually sat and read this weekend in its entirety. The Complete Streets grant is for up to $400,000, is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Is that a one-year thing, multi-year thing?
No, you can, it's a competitive grant that you can come back as long as the state funds the program. And what we're hoping for is, given the fact that you've got such significant amount of infrastructure funding for, the state's got $5.3 billion in Arpa funding themselves, that we're hoping that they're going to push a lot of that money through the existing programs, the Chapter 90, Complete Streets, MVP programs. So that would be our first round. And just to keep in mind that there's two pieces to it. Under the Complete Streets, let me just back up. So for folks at home that might be looking at this, there's a Sidewalk master plan, which was just completed. That's really an inventory and assessment of all existing sidewalks in the town of Northborough. They're all rated. And the point of that is to come up with a maintenance plan like we did for our roadways. We have an overall condition index for all of our sidewalks. We know we've got about $1.5 million in work that needs to be done for sidewalks that are in fair or poor condition, similar to our roadways. So that's the sidewalk maintenance plan. And then moving forward, you have the Complete Streets program that we're participating in. And essentially, the Complete Streets is more of a looking at multimodal transportation, bike lanes, connecting gaps between the existing sidewalks and so forth. So under the Complete Streets programming, the Board of Selectmen has approved a policy, and then we applied for and received a grant for $32,000 roughly, or $35,200. That grant is for doing a town-wide prioritization plan. And so we're looking at holistically the entire town, and that includes doing all sorts of public outreach and input to make sure that we're hearing from everybody about the types of transportation opportunities they'd like to see, where sidewalk gaps, bike lanes, trails, things of that nature. So that will be taking place during the next year. We have received that grant. Then in addition to that, because we are, our policy for being a Complete Streets community has been accepted and approved by Mass DOT, we're eligible to apply for grants. And so the DPW director has already applied for a grant to look at shared use on Bartlett Street, because that's one of the areas that we've been focused on due to recent development down there. But no, that's not just a one-time, the Complete Streets program. As long as you have a prioritization plan, basically use that prioritization plan to then apply for grants. And what we're hoping to do is to leverage the second tranche of our Arpa funding and potentially free cash next year to leverage that towards getting other infrastructure grants. Because oftentimes, one of the most compelling ways to get a grant is to fund the design and engineering work. And so then you've got a real design and a hard number, and obviously it shows a commitment on the part of the town that this is a project that you want to move forward to if you spent $50,000 or $60,000 on the design work. And so we use that to submit for grants. So we've got the master plan. That would be through the capital budget. We've got the Complete Streets program, the overall town-wide prioritization plan, and then grants that we can apply for. So we've got multiple things moving at the same time. So I got to tell you, the DPW director, you heard from him at your last meeting, giving you an update on all the projects. He's got a full plate, and moving forward, particularly given the fact that we know we're going to get additional Chapter 90 funding and pothole funding. And as I said, infrastructure funding in general through various programs is going to be flowing pretty heavily over the next 12 to 24 months. We're anticipating that we're going to be jumping on and taking advantage of as many grant programs as we can. So.
Thank you.
Probably a much longer explanation than you were looking for, Bill.
Just want to know if it was recurring, basically.
Yeah, the grant program, again, this is under the Baker administration, so anything can happen. You know, he's not running for reelection, so, but the Complete Streets program, like the MVP program, has very strong support in the legislature, so it's not just an executive office program. So we're, again, they have a significant amount of funding, a good amount of which is targeted towards infrastructure. So, you know, if you've got the funding and you have existing programs that are popular with the municipalities, you know, the odds are that they're going to continue in some form.
Thank you.
All right, so the motion's been made and seconded, and we've heard some discussion. Is there any other discussion? Well, okay, all in favor of accepting them? Those opposed? Next order of business, the preliminary 2023 capital budget. John?
So if you look at this document, it says revised 3/9/22. It's an update of the spreadsheet that I had provided to you at your last meeting. And a couple things have tweaked. Nothing major has changed. One thing that we've been watching very carefully, and we talked about this at your last meeting, is the fact that due to supply chain limitations and chip shortages, what we're finding on the equipment side is that it's a long lead time and the prices are escalating. So we updated the DPW costs at your last meeting, working with the police chief, and in preparation for this meeting, his cruiser costs, in addition to the delay, have gone up a little bit too. They were at 155,000. He's asked that that be moved to 165, just due to the cost, as I said, cost escalation. And in order to make that fit, I had just tweaked down the roadway improvement line to 454. Really what we were trying to do is, as we got the key capital projects, we're trying to backfill in as much as we could to increase that roadway maintenance number. So whether or not it's up or down by $10,000 isn't going to materially impact anything, but ultimately we have to balance this capital budget. So that's really the only tweak that was made in terms of the projects. On the right-hand side of the handout, you can see the breakdown again between free cash and what we are proposing to be the projects funded through the American Rescue Plan Act, which would go to the Board of Selectmen. So this year's capital budget and capital plan is going to be a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more difficult to explain. It's not cut and dry, because some projects will go to town meeting, others wouldn't. It would just be a simple vote of the Board of Selectmen to release the funding. So tonight, you have the police chief and the fire chief here. The fire chief has a project. He has projects that are going to appear and be funded with that will appear on the town meeting warrant, funded with revolving fund fees for EMS, for ambulance fees, essentially. So that's not being funded by free cash either. But then he has a fire engine that we're looking to move up in order to clear out capacity in the next couple of years, because we have the large building project that's coming. And so he also has an engine that's having some mechanical issues, and so it all makes sense to move it up and fund it using Arpa. The other thing that I just included on the spreadsheet that wasn't on here last time, if you look down at the bottom, these are all the projects, essentially, that we're looking to fund in one way or another, some of which will go to town meeting, some of which could be funded with a simple vote of the Board of Selectmen using the ARPA funding. And then the two projects on the bottom are capital projects that will show up in our capital plan, but they're not funded by free cash. The ambulance replacement is funded, as I said, through the EMS revolving fund from ambulance fees. And then next week, you'll hear from Scott Charpentier, the DPW director, when he goes through his projects. But he has a construction request of $360,000 for sewer inflow and infiltration. So we're required by Mass DEP to test our sewer system for water leaking into it and sewage leaking out of it, and then we're required to have a maintenance plan to fix it. And so we've done the study, and then now we've identified the priority areas to be fixed. And so this request is to begin that process. So what you'll see is, as we go through our 6-year capital plan, you're going to see money to do the study, and then to do some construction, and to update the study, and to make the repairs through construction. So this is the first request to do some of the repair work that's been identified through the previous study. So you have free cash projects, Arpa projects, and then a project funded through ambulance fees and a project funded through essentially sewer fees. So together, they will constitute, what we're investing in our capital plant in the upcoming fiscal year. In terms of what will be included in the actual plan and what will go to town meeting in the form of warrant articles will be the free cash projects you see here, and the two projects that are funded from other sources other than tax revenues. So these are the projects. You'll hear about a good number of them this evening. At the next meeting, Scott Charpentier will then go through and really do the lion's share with the DPW projects. And again, the DPW projects are primarily, equipment, infrastructure investment. These are things that have been in the 6-year plan, and, you've talked about them for the last 5 years before they're on deck for funding. So this is the updated plan. Again, it's rock solid. The thing that really is quite amazing about this plan as currently proposed is if you look at all of these projects, it's 4.3, a little over $5 million in projects. The way this is structured, if all of these projects are approved and we move forward, there'll be no additional tax impact on the residents, because we're using available free cash, budget surplus, available federal aid in the form of American Rescue Plan, and then fees like ambulance fees and sewer fees that are designed to include the replacement of capital. So again, this is the plan working at its best. So, and I always love to be able to present at town meeting and say you can approve the following, 8 or 11 articles, and there's no additional tax impact. So I'm happy to answer any questions anybody may have regarding the updated capital budget projects.
Seeing none, let's move on. Next item is the police department.
Yeah, why don't you switch seats just so that the microphone will pick you up.
Stuff everywhere so you can just go like.
If you don't mind.
Just ignore the noises. Yeah. That was my knee creaking, and your new knee. My new knee is just rusty. Okay, good evening.
Evening.
Well, I'll start with the first project, which is our annual bread and butter one, which is to replace cruisers. If you remember back in May of 2020 at annual town meeting, that was a 2-car replacement year, but due to uncertainties with COVID and revenues, that was cut down to 1. That one year where we did not get the second replacement car, that's actually resulted now in 3 of our cars going way over their extended warranty mileages, because we're having 2 drivers splitting between those other 3 cars. So it adds to the significant wear and tear on 3 of the other cars, and they're basically over 135,000. They're pretty beat, and the warranty's expired at 100,000. So that normally does not happen. So this year, as you know, we have a 2-year and 3-year replacement scheme. 2 cars 1 year, 3 cars the next. 2020 was a 2-car year, but we got 1. The following year, for 21, was a 2-car year. A 3-car year. Now we're replacing now, 2022 town meeting for fiscal 23 is that makeup year where we're requesting 3 cars to get us back on our regular fleet schedule. So that would be 3 cars to be purchased after July 1st of 2023. We had originally put in for, I believe, 155,000, or 150 rather. But just the purchases of cars that we had scheduled for this year, we scheduled the same, figured the same budget month. I've gone over by about $3,000 per car, just trying to upfit and get equipment. There's a major backlog on equipment. A lot of these manufacturers and dealerships are just kind of passing their costs and stuff along to us, so that $50,000 per car just doesn't work anymore. To stay within build-out budget for the cruisers, I'm going to need approximately 55, and I have no idea. They're saying that the following year and the next year is not going to be much better. They'll still be, due to inflation and other costs, they're going to continue to increase. So, in subsequent years, I did increase that more, but that's obviously subject to change. Things might improve. So that would be for the replacement of vehicles. We're looking at, for this year, we're in 23 replacing our 2014 Dodge Ram 1500 pickup truck with a Ford F-150, just to keep one pickup truck in the fleet because it's a very utilitarian purpose for us, as well as being a patrol vehicle. Other than that, we're looking at minimum of one, possibly two hybrid Ford Explorers. So that all depends on availability. I had ordered hybrids for this year, but the orders were canceled by Ford, and if I had stuck with those, I would not have seen them until maybe August of this year, and that was on last year's CIP. As it is now, two of the cruisers that we have waiting, I ordered two cars in June, end of June. I authorized the dealership to order the cars based on the funding that was approved at town meeting, and I still don't have them. So we had to cancel. Well, Ford canceled them, and then they replaced the order, and then again to get those hybrids was going to be like August of this year, and now I'm talking about replacing cars in '23. So we canceled that order because there were regular Ford SUVs, the Explorers, on a dealership lot in McGovern, and I forget that they moved recently. I think Milford. So we're ordering them through there, and then they still have to be upfitted. So that's the cruiser replacement scheme.
Chief, can I just
Sure.
interrupt for 1 second? So I just want to make a point, and then I want to set the table for a second as he proceeds with his presentation. One is that we did delay a cruiser, but because we have kept to this 2 vehicles 1 year, 3 vehicles the next year, we know the quality of our fleet, and we know when we can push things a little bit to buy ourselves some time in the event of a recession or a pandemic or something like that. So it worked out exactly as planned, but to the chief's point, now it's time we have to make that up. So that's why you're seeing 2 years in a row of 3 vehicles. It's to be expected. It should be a surprise. The other thing I just wanted to say in terms of setting the table for, especially for somebody at home that might be watching, is in terms of what you have before you is it's the section from the capital improvement plan for the police department. It has every project that he is contemplating for the next 6 years. And so what the police chief just went through right now is the one project that is planned to go forward to this year's annual town meeting, and that's the replacement of 3 cruisers. Now, what we have them do every year when they come in and meet with you, all the department heads, is they talk to you about all the other projects they're planning out for the next 5 years in addition to the current fiscal year. And it's important for people to understand that because when you get to the point where you're approving a capital budget, these are projects that have typically been before you and you've discussed in great detail for 4 or 5 years. And in that process, we have refined pricing. We have sought grants. You're going to hear from the fire chief in a moment, some good news regarding one of his projects that has disappeared because he was able to find some funding. So every project from this point forward, 2024 to 2028, that the chief's going to be talking to you about, none of these are on deck for the upcoming town meeting. So Again, there's time to ask questions, there's time to seek alternative funding, and this is why when we go to town meeting, we have a capital budget, why things go so smoothly, and why so far since fiscal 2012, outside of large capital projects, we've been able to pay for all of this equipment on a pay-as-you-go basis, because we have time to massage, to move things up, to move things back, and to approach this in a very logical, planned-out manner. So the rest of the projects the chief's going to talk about tonight for the balance of his department are just informational right now, but by all means, if you have questions or you would like additional information from staff, you let us know and we'll get that to you. But as you can see, you're going to have multiple years to talk about those projects, and I just think it's important for people to understand that, because I think oftentimes we go to town meeting with these capital budgets. I think people are under the impression that these are just requests that came in this year and that we found funding for. No, it's a 6-year plan, and massaging the funding and making sure that you don't have projects all bunching up in one year is all part of what this committee does. And again, I'm telling you things you already know, but again, for folks that might be watching at home that might not understand what we're doing here tonight, I don't want them to think, that we've got $1 million worth of capital projects coming forward just for the police department. We don't. We got 3 cruisers for $165,000. Okay? Thank
And
you,
I guess, to John's point, for the folks at home, my actual cruiser replacement schedule goes out to 2028. And it shows 2 cars, 3 cars, 2 cars, 3 cars, so.
Right.
Next would be police station. As you know, the police station's basically a 10,000 square foot wood frame home. It wasn't the greatest design. I had nothing to do with that, but it's shown its age. It's 32 years old, and it needs to be restained desperately. We have, back in 2020, I reached out to the Sheriff's Department, late February, early March. I had reached out to the Sheriff's Department. The last time the building was stained, it was done by the community service program out of the Sheriff's Department. And basically, it cost us about $5,000 for materials, and we had to provide lunch for the trustees that were out on work release and rent a lift for them. So it was really a great deal for the town. So I tried to bring that back to Northborough back in 2020. And shortly thereafter, I got notice from the Sheriff's Department that they just closed down the jail and the House of Correction, and due to COVID, and because they didn't want a chance sending people out into the community and having people get infected and come back into population. I called them again in December and asked if they had any update on that program, and I was told that they're still not doing that. So I will try again, probably on Monday, because obviously that would be the way to go. It's much more cost effective. We've gone the gamut from, I was approached by a local painter that wanted to do it for free, but again, that's against, public procurement laws, and, because it flies in the face of prevailing wage. I did ask some local painters to give me some quotes just to see where I was going with it. And basically, none of them really wanted to deal with it because of prevailing wage. They were too small, and they just didn't. The paperwork alone was enough to, cost them more money than the job would have been worth. So then I contacted Sean Thompson, the new facilities director, and he put out a request for quotes. And he got, obviously, because it's a municipal job, it's prevailing wage, and he got quotes ranging from $40,000 to $70,000. So, I mean, for what could have been done either for free or for very minimal. We may still have an avenue with Assabet for some of it, which will, obviously minimize the cost. They're restricted to how high they can go because of the height of the building. They can't go up in aerial lifts and things like that. So, but there are portions of the ground floor of the station that are under 12 feet. So I'm sure you could do it with a step ladder. So that's also an avenue. But it's scheduled for FY24.
So if I can just chime in here. So this is one of those projects that wasn't in the plan because we were successful in getting it taken care of through the sheriff's program. And I anticipated we'd be able to do it again, as did the chief. But we didn't anticipate a pandemic. And we were also hoping that it would be a temporary pause. So there is a chance that that program will come back. I'm sure they're going to have a backlog of requests. I don't know where we would fall in that backlog, but at this point, we want to get it in the plan, because if that falls through, we need to maintain the building, we need to get it painted. And as Bill said, we look at all avenues. We do a lot of work with Assabet Valley Technical High School, but it's a very high 3-story backdrop. They can't work that high. And we're always looking for ways to just get this stuff done, to be able to pull this off. So unfortunately, this is one of those projects that you saw drop in that we normally wouldn't, and it's due to the pandemic. So one of the other alternatives is potentially you could use ARPA funding for that. It is, in my opinion, pandemic-related. But in any event, I want to make sure that people understand this whole concept that the police chief just spoke to regarding prevailing wages. Some of the senior members have heard me go down this path many times. Under the state procurement laws, we don't just bid out a project and get to hire the lowest qualified bidder. Anything pertaining to 4 walls and a roof requires prevailing wages. And it's the state tells us what those wages are. And I have documented year after year how much higher those wages are than anybody in the private sector would pay. In fact, we filed locally in Northborough special legislation to exempt projects under $100,000 because it was such an additional cost escalation. You look at the police department station, it's roughly a 10,000 square foot giant wooden house. Can you imagine anybody paying $70,000 to paint their house? Why do we? And so that's the frustration that we face, because even the local painters that will come and take pride and want to do a job here, they have no choice. If they're doing a municipal job, they have to pay these prevailing wage rates. And so, and many of them don't want to be bothered with the paperwork and the reporting that's associated with that. So what you tend to get larger companies that are used to doing prevailing wage work, and they have a whole compliance department that they have, and they know how to do all the paperwork, and they carry that overhead. And unfortunately, those are the ones that will come in and quote this. The small local painters from Northborough, either they don't want to do this project, or they just can't jump through the red tape and hurdles. And I'll tell you the other thing that we heard the last time the previous chief and I were discussing getting this place painted. And we talked to local painters, and one of the things they said to us was, look, I don't want to come and do that project and pay my guys twice what I pay them in any other job, because once they get that, then it's hard for them to go back to what I can afford to pay them and price jobs competitively. And we hear that often, and we had our legislative delegation in over the years, and I actually got, for several projects, a prevailing wage quote. First, I asked for just a quote from somebody who does the work, and then I told them it's prevailing wage and gave them the wage sheets that they have to comply with. And I documented, in no uncertain terms, it was at least a 30% increase. And we showed on the same letterhead from the same company for the same project what anybody else would pay and what the town of Northborough as a public entity has to pay. And that was the basis for us to ask the legislature to approve special legislation that would exempt projects $100,000 or less. And the idea is that we know for a large school building project or the fire station building project, we know we're going to pay prevailing wage. It's kind of baked into the overall cost of a big project, right? But to get a door replaced or a room painted, we're seeing, this exorbitant price. And anyway, long story short, I filed special legislation. It never made it out of the Rules Committee. And when legislation goes to the House or the Senate, at first it goes to the Rules Committee. The only purpose of the Rules Committee is to determine what committee it goes to for further study. It never got out of there. And so there wasn't much of an appetite. I've worked through the Mass Municipal Association to file legislation as well. We just haven't been successful. So I guess part of this is, and I know most of you, based on your years of service, understand this, anytime we do a building project, it's going to cost the town of Northborough and the taxpayers more money than it would the private sector. I can't tell you how many times I hear builders say to me, oh, I can't believe what this costs. I can do this for, a fraction of the price. I say, yeah, but not legally. So we have to comply with the law. So this is where I have a facilities manager who's trained in this went out and got quotes for $50,000. I know for a fact if this wasn't a prevailing wage project, that it would cost no more than $15,000 to paint that building. So,
To John's point, I did ask a couple of local people, I said, if this was a private building, what would you charge us to paint it, stain it? And it's about $13,000. But under the prevailing wage, like I said, John said, you're looking at $50,000.
that's why we
So-
try so hard to get the prisoners in here to paint it for us for lunch.
Yeah. Okay, so that's pending. The next one, again, is, it's been in the 6-year plan. It's now nearing, it's 2025 scheduled, is for the replacement of our backup emergency generator at the police station. Clearly, we need electricity. It's our 911 center, it's our communications center, and basically the basic seat of operations in an emergency, other than the fire station, which is also on emergency power in the town hall. We are looking for some grants. I'm thinking maybe this might fall under the MVP grant for emergency generator for the fire station. And we're looking for grant opportunities, but in the event we're not successful with that, I got a price that included putting it outside, because when the building was built, the code allowed for the generator to be inside the building in a separate room, and it's an interior generator. The codes have changed; it has to be put outside. So there's some construction costs involved as well, as far as pouring a pad, and it needs to be secured under accreditation standards, because it can't be it's got to be in a situation where it can't be tampered with, and so there's security costs that are factored in as well. So that's where that stands. Again, that number was, again, based on the cost of replacing a generator with some additional capacity than what we have now, because right about now, when it's running, it's at its max capability. So we did have to add, a few years back, we had to add an air conditioning compressor to keep parts of the building in our server room. It needed to have additional cooling because of the heat of the servers and everything that was in there. So that basically brought that generator to its max with adding those compressors. So we'll look for a little bit bigger generator as far as output goes.
One quick comment on the generator, and I know that most of you know this, is years ago we went with a belts and suspenders sort of hardening of our facility process. And one of the things that we identified was, both the fire department, town hall, and the police department, they need to be operational, and they all have backup generators to varying degrees of how much of the capacity of the building. But we went to the hassle of actually wiring the buildings, and we have a portable generator on wheels that if this generator were to die tomorrow, or the fire department's generator were to die tomorrow, we literally can wheel that thing up. It's all wired. They just plug it in and fire it up, and they're back up and running. And so that's part of our plan, our backup plan. So the generator is the backup. We have a backup to the backup. So again, this is out a couple of years. We feel comfortable waiting that long, but in the event that something happens, we have a plan for how we would address that.
Again, I'm not just replacing for the sake of replacing. It is 32 years old, and like fire trucks, it's not or cruisers. The mileage is not a true reflection of the wear and tear on the vehicle, because they're idling all the time and hard use and things like that. So it's basically a combination of age and hours. And we're at the point where even we have a service contract with a generator maintenance company. They come in, they've tested. We test it under load once a month, and it's running fine. But over the years, like a couple of years ago, we had to pay to repair the radiator. It was leaking. This last time they came out and did an inspection and ran it under load, it resulted in them replacing radiator hoses, some belts, some other things, and it needed a new battery. And that's even got a little trickle charger on it. But the maintenance is done annually, and it does work, and it is reliable. It's just getting on in years, and it's getting up there in mileage, as far as hours.
I am too.
Yeah. Well, yours is even older than mine. Well, yeah. I don't run as good as I used to either. So, next project due out in 2025 is just a kind of a remodel of our dispatch center. It's not the radios. That was done back about 5 years ago, actually even more than that, when Chief Leahy had it in his capital plan as far as the digital communications. It says dispatch console, but that's in the server room. It's a computer console that all of our digital radios work off of. This is actually the creature comforts, the desks, the cabinets, the chassis that the dispatchers sit at. And I don't know if any of you have been on the station. I'm sure I know some of you have. But basically, it is like circa 1970 NASA launch control panels. And they were built for large analog equipment and TV monitors that slid in. Those are dinosaurs. They've gone the way of dinosaurs. And now if you look at that photo, we've got nice LED screens, but they're on stands because the console behind it is useless. It's also not an adjustable counter as far as, I get dispatches from 5'1" to 6'4". So the counter needs to, it's very easy to do that. So we're looking for an ergonomic design to where they work and to basically coordinate all of the screens that they have into like a 6-rack mount. So it's basically, the furniture and the hardware that we would use to actually make the place a more functional space than what it is. It's a small room, but we can, with some modern office furniture, we can actually make it work better for them. Because they're in their own enclosed room for 8 hours a day, sometimes 16 if they're doing a double. So it just needs to be upgraded.
And I think the other point to make, Bill, is that was originally designed for one dispatcher, and now during the busy times, we routinely have 2 dispatchers in there. So they've made it work, but it's time to get an overhaul, and I think you'll actually in this room here. You remember that monstrosity that was over on that side of the room?
Basically what we had.
It's the old cable access. That's now, we just moved that out yesterday, and now you got this little portable thing that handles it all. It's very similar to that. So.
Okay. Last but not least is, again, multi-band portable radios scheduled for 2026 funding. This is our tri-band radios, similar to, exactly the same as what the fire department has now, that they were fortunate enough to get a grant for. And again, we'll look for grants, hopefully, but we've got a couple of years to do that. This would allow us to operate on 3 different radio bands and spectrums. So 800, where we could talk with Marlboro, and Shrewsbury's going 800. State police, local public safety, 800 mutual aid channels. Right now, we have that ability in the cruisers on a mobile radio, but once an officer leaves the car, he loses the ability to talk to another town. So with this radio, he could switch to their band. We've got people around us. We're surrounded by UHF and 800 and 1 low-band town and 1 VHF town. So Shrewsbury's on the same band that we are, so we can just talk to them fairly easily. Different frequencies, but we can switch to it. Boylston's on a low band, so we have to have a low-band radio in the car. Berlin and Westboro are on UHF, so there's a UHF radio in the car, so we can talk to them. And Marlboro and soon-to-be Shrewsbury are on 800, so, and the state police as well as, what's that?
700, right?
This,
State police are 700, aren't they?
800.
800.
Yeah. So we have that ability in the cruisers, but as soon as we leave that cruiser, all they have is a channel, a portable radio that talks to Northborough. So these portables will allow my officers, if they're working a track of a wanted or a lost person in the woods and the state police helicopter's up above, they'd be able to switch to that airwing frequency and talk to them direct. So they're expensive because of the technology, very expensive. The model radio on it is like a 7500, and when Motorola basically specs a radio and gives it a model number, that's usually reflective of the cost per unit. So they have come down somewhat because they've got some competition.
We paid $5,038 per radio, and that's because we bought so many of them.
Yeah. And the
That's
radio
just the radio,
yeah,
not programming, not everything else, just the radio.
that's more than the cost of what we put for the mobile radio in the cruiser. Yep. So that's out there, and just to get 1 per officer from myself down, and 1, I think I factored in maybe 2 spares and a couple extra batteries. It's $145,000. But there's basically only a couple of games in town, and Harris, I think, no.
There's one. If you buy Motorola, you buy it from Motorola.
Yeah, no, I mean as far as, not Wills, Kenwood.
Oh, yeah, Kenwood's the other option, yeah.
But they both are around the same price.
Yep.
Those are the two manufacturers, so. That concludes my presentation. Any questions?
Very good.
Okay.
Any questions, guys? Thanks for coming in, Chief. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Thanks, Chief.
Next item of business would be the fire department requests.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. So I'm going to be discussing 4 different projects. Plus, I want to just point out the sheet that I believe Town Administrator shared. I do a 10-year plan. I know that the regular plan that people do is a 6-year plan. I do a 10-year plan, and I do that for several reasons. Number one, I want to know where I'm going. Number two, I may not be around after another, 4 years, John? Then somebody else may be here. They'll know where I had been pointing to, and that helps them a lot. It doesn't mean they need to stay there, but it helps them a lot. It also allows me to make adjustments and leave some open years when I have some other projects coming on, such as a fire station or whatever it is. So you see, if you look at, John, they'll have this
The
copy.
Chief's referring to the legal size sheet here. Yeah, and you'll notice that this obviously mirrors the 6-year capital improvement plan. I mean, for our purposes, our 6-year capital improvement plan has a project detail sheet for every single project. It's 70 pages long. So if I went out 10 years on everything, we do actually, with all the departments, we actually look out much further. But like everything else, when you shake the snow globe and you look the further in the future you look, the less reliable it is. But it's important to know. With things like the fire department, where he's got pieces of equipment, just like DPW, that is replaced on a 20-year schedule, you pretty much know you're going to be replacing those pieces of equipment at 20 years. So those things all stretch out, as you know. And we've shared those schedules with you, with DPW in the past. So.
Yeah. And we're talking pieces of equipment that eventually are over $1 million. So we like to be able to look out forward and see what we're looking at. And there's like I said, remember I made a comment earlier about being quiet today? They've gone on 4 calls in a row. So now, don't tell them I said it's quiet, because they'll be mad at me. You guys are going crazy. So let me talk about the projects we have for this year. So the first thing you're going to see is an ambulance replacement. One of the things when I first came here that we did is we went from 2 ambulances to 3 ambulances. And the 3rd ambulance serves as a mechanical backup. So it sits there and doesn't do anything until such time as one of the other 2 ambulances goes out. Now, as I just said, they're on 4 medical calls right now. So there's 2 ambulances on the road transporting. There's another one coming in from Westboro, and I'm not sure where the other one's coming from. Crazy, right? So it's not unusual for us to have 2 ambulances on the road. So what we do is we keep that 3rd ambulance as a backup, and then when one of the ones go out, that steps up. But that one tends to be our older one that's been beat up a lot. And right now that's Medic 2. Medic 2 has 74,800 miles on it. And as the chief alluded to, it's not just the miles, it's the hours as well, which is almost 4,000 hours on it. So it's been beat up a lot. It does a lot. Probably our medics, our medic trucks are the busiest trucks in the house, except for our squad, which runs quite a bit. So we run an ALS service, and as such, an advanced life support service, and as such, some of the equipment we have is a little bit more expensive. So we have to make sure we put a stretcher, and we just started this with our last ambulance, a stretcher that has a lifting system. So instead of the guys having to pick up this stretcher and put it in, you actually roll the stretcher directly in and push a button, the legs lift up and it loads. So one back injury would cost a lot more than one of those stretchers and lift system, which is about, just that system is about $50,000, $50,000 to $60,000 for just that system. So that's all built into these numbers that I'm presenting to you. So this year we put $400,000 in. We've also noticed, if you've seen our Medic 1, it's a smaller ambulance than our older ambulances. We're going back down to a 550 style ambulance because it's much easier to drive. It's much less expensive to fix. It's just overall a better ride for the patient as opposed to the trucks that we were running. So that was the big reason we went to that. One of the important things to understand, and John pointed this out, is the money for this comes from the revolving account. Now, every year, prices for ambulances go up. So we're like, and we know that, and prices for EMS stuff go up. Well, not too long ago, the Board of Selectmen voted to increase and to change our fees. As a result of that, our balance has gone up in our account, which is good, which will allows us to purchase this. I sat down with the finance director to make sure that I wasn't misreading things correctly. He says, no, we're okay. We can do that. We can bond that out through that, and we can cover it. So very excited we get to get another ambulance. Our ambulances last about 10 years. And again, that's going from first due to second due to reserve. So we use them in 3 different capacities. The first due one is there. So Medic 1 right now, which is our first due, has 50,000 miles on it. Okay? And that's a 20, so that one will go back to our second due. And then the second due, which is Medic 3, will go back to our reserve. So we try to get as much use out of these as possible before we move them in. And then we'll trade them in. So that's the first thing this year. The second thing this year is Engine 1. And as John indicated, we're looking to utilize Arpa funds for that replacement. Every year, I bring in a company that does pump testing, and I bring in a company that does pump maintenance. And it just so happens the pump maintenance company is a gentleman I worked with for 25 years in Merrimack, New Hampshire. Before I came down here, he has his own company. But he is one of the most respected pump mechanics in the Northeast. So he comes down and he does our inspections. Well, this year, Engine 1 passed the test, but it failed his inspection. So you guys, there's packings, what's called packings on, right? So the packings are as tight as they can go. Can't do anything else. So now we're starting to get leaks and a potential of a failure of a pump. The estimate is somewhere between $25,000 and $35,000. Now, when you're talking a 20-plus-year-old truck, what happens is, as soon as they drop that pump, what wasn't broken now gets broken, right? So your pump rebuild ends up going up. So I explained to John, I'm not comfortable, and John supports this as well, dumping $25,000 to $35,000 in a truck we're going to replace. Doesn't make sense. So this opportunity worked out very well for us to be able to say, okay, this is a great time to do this. But, as the police chief stated and John stated, it's taking forever to get anything. My car replacement and my pickup were ordered right after town meeting last year, and we still haven't seen them. The pickup was canceled twice, no, once, it was canceled once, so we had to go to a different dealer. And because our hands are somewhat tied that we have to go through municipal bids and all that, we can't just walk to the lot and say, I'll take that one. Right? It's a lot more complicated than that. So we're still looking September, October, November. We don't know. So they're on hold. Fire engines are the same thing. I just talked to the chief in Wayland. They just got their engine they ordered 13 months ago. Right? And their price is right. We're dead on. Our price is really good. I'm pretty comfortable. I talked to chief from Westboro. They just ordered a new truck right around the same price, a little bit less. So I'm pretty comfortable with our amount we have in there.
Chief, your price, your estimates for the pumper and the ambulance, is that fully turnkey, fully outfitted?
So, no, yes and no. So ambulance, yes, everything that's on there that will be on there, with the exception of some things that we'll just transfer over. So when we get rid of that other truck, we'll move our the thing that does the compressions for us, okay? We'll move that on there. We'll probably get a new monitor because that's needed, but all the other equipment, a lot of it will just get moved over. That's not a problem. The engine, we move 90% of what we have over. Our hose is fine. Hose will last. We just keep testing it. When it fails, then we replace it. Right, so the hose moves over. The axes move over. The Scott packs move over. The new stuff are radios, lights. Those are things because that technology is constantly changing. But we try to do as much as we can, move it over. If I do need to buy some equipment, I normally give us a little wiggle room in that price so I can. I don't believe in buying stuff just to buy it. For those of you that have been around, I'll turn back $100,000 if I don't need it because I'm not going to just spend it. That's not my job. So,
Thank you.
Pretty much, yes. So that's, John, did you have anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, if I can just chime
Please.
in for a moment here. So this project, an engine replacement, has been in the capital plan, well, if you listen to the chief, for 10 years. It's been in this plan for 6 years, moved up every year, and right now it was scheduled to be to be replaced next year in fiscal 2024. And what we're proposing is that move up one, because it's having some mechanical issues, so come up 1 year. The other is as you've seen from the financial plan that I presented at the beginning of your meeting, and we reviewed at your last meeting, is this is a project that's perfect for funding from ARPA. If we don't use it, ARPA funding for that project, we'll have to issue debt. We can't, pay as we go for a $800,000 apparatus. We just so happen to have these federal funds. It's a perfect match. The timing is perfect, and the need is there. But the other piece of it is, and we'll talk about this in a moment, is we had a fire station building project that was on a different track, and that's been delayed. So the station's been delayed a year. So what we don't want to have the station and then an engine on top of it going to town meeting. Like everything, we want to spread these things out. The beauty of the proposal that we're hoping that you'll endorse and recommend to the Board of Selectmen of using ARPA is we get rid of an $800,000 piece of equipment that needs to be replaced. We get that taken care of with no additional tax impact. So we're always trying to create capacity within the operating budget for the debt service, but more importantly, for the taxpayer. We don't want that. We always want to plan. The reason why we plan out like we do is we want to smooth the tax impact. We don't want to have these wild swings where all of a sudden the taxes go up $1,000 and they go back down and they swing. We kind of want to make sure that we have a regular routine replacement and that investment is steady and consistent over the years. And the only time it bumps up at all is when you're doing a major building project, because it's unavoidable if you're talking about $15 or $20 million. But when you do that, for those big major building projects, you're at a point where you have paid down your debt. And as you know, right now, our level of debt is the lowest it's ever been. It's down around 4%. And just to put it into context, bond rating agencies like to see municipal debt somewhere around 8 to 10%. Because they want to make sure you're investing in your infrastructure and your equipment. In fact, one of the red flags when we just got rated, when we refinanced some debt, was they were concerned that our level of debt was so low. And then when we showed them and explained our free cash plan and all the stuff that we've done and how we've taken care of everything without having to add debt so that we are in a good position for the next building project, they actually gave us extra points towards our bond rating for excellent management. So, and that in turn results in lower interest rate. It's no different than when you go out and for a mortgage, you have a credit rating. If your credit's bad, you pay more in interest. If your credit's really good, you pay less in interest. So that's benefited us very, very well. So.
Thank you, John. I'm going to skip over 24 just for now. That's the fire station because I'm going to let John speak to that. But if I could speak about the rescue replacement. So our rescue pumper is coming up due. It's scheduled for 2025. That truck right now is set up as an engine that has some extra equipment on it. One of the things we're looking at doing is doing more of and I guess probably haven't seen it, but Westboro has a truck similar to this. It's what's called a wet rescue. So it still functions as a pump. It has a much smaller tank on it. And we can put more rescue equipment on it so it can function more as a rescue. Price is similar. That $800,000 may stick, it may go up. Again, as the police chief said and as John said, prices are escalating like crazy. So, we look at what the current market is and can kind of estimate off of that. That truck does every motor vehicle accident, does carbon monoxide responses, does other types of rescue responses. So that's what that truck is set up for. It's got rescue tools on it. Our hope is to be able to put some more rescue tools on it, some more shores for motor vehicle accidents. We have a vehicle on its side. We have some older shoring. We're going to put some air shoring on it, which is much quicker to deploy, much safer for our guys. So the idea is we may increase that price a little bit to cover some of that equipment and downsize the size of the pump on that. So that's not the pump, the tank on that. So that's really pretty much the same as the other one, just slightly different.
Just one point, just for clarification for you, because you saw this in the plan last year. These two, the engine one and the rescue, they're both essentially, as the chief said, engines. And this one is a 2004. The one we're replacing or recommending for replacement is a 2005. So originally in the replacement plan, they were switched, but because the engine one is having mechanical issues and difficulties, it's just like you have two cars the same age, one falls apart, it has issues. So the chief has asked to flip those. Essentially, though, they're two engine replacements, same price, but in case you're wondering why we're replacing a newer one, it's only a year difference.
It's only a year difference,
But
yeah.
it's having some mechanical issues, so.
All right. The last item, before I turn it over to John, I would talk about is when it says project removed due to grant. So I've been lucky since I've been here. 2 items I put on the CIP I've been able to cover with a grant. And I would love to say that's because of my great skills, but it's not. It's because of my grant writer's great skills, who I had the same guy do both of those grants. It's Mike Borwick. Mike is now, has left, and I have a new Mike. I have Michael Parr, who's a captain in Maynard, but happens to be a resident in town, and he's working for me as my hazmat assistant and helping write grants. But this one was written by Mike Borwick. It was in for 6 years. It was ready, or not in for, it's been in for several years. It's ready for, it was coming up in 2025. We applied for the grant 3 times, rejected twice, the 3rd time we got it.
That's important. It's not like we just try to get a grant one time. These guys go that's one of the reasons why you have a 6-year plan. As soon as it shows up in the plan, they start looking for grants. And you're not going to get it the first time. You might not get it the second time. But this is over a $350,000 project that has now come off your plan and freed up for other things.
Right. So the project was listed in 2025 as $350,000. The grant we got was $230,000. So one of the questions you may ask is, well, how is that? You had it $350 and $230. Well, again, technology, as you guys know, is always changing and going, and the price of it just skyrockets. Motorola, I love Motorola radios, but Motorola times out their equipment. So when it gets to a certain end of life, it's end of life. No more support. You're done. You got to buy a new one. And of course, as the chief said, these are APX 8000s. So an APX 8000 is about an $8,000 radio when everything's said and done. We've received these radios. We took it off the CIP. Every single full-time firefighter has a radio issued to them, and more importantly, it's programmed to them. So what that means is they're inside the building and they can't talk and they hit their button and it shows up on my radio, I know not just what radio, I know who it is. It tells me this is firefighter Snee and he's got a problem. So now I know who we're looking for. If I wanted to spend even more money, Motorola has this really cool thing that'll geolocate the radio. Problem is, I need 3 more aides at a fire in order to run all this stuff, and I got me and my captains are doing firefighting. So there's some really cool stuff. We're just not there. The cost is outrageous as well. We're just not there yet for that technology. But so we spent $224,000, $224,742 just on the radios and programming. We then bought some fobs that allow it to communicate directly with our CBAs and a few other things that enhance that radio itself to come up to the total of $230,000. Very excited for that. Happy to be able to take it off, and that's where we're sitting with this one. So the last item to speak about, at least in our 6-year, is the fire station. We're very excited to be moving forward with this. We're looking forward to getting the RFQ out now that the site's all been cleaned and we're working on it, which is the next thing, is the RFQ. But I'll go ahead and let John, if you'd like to speak to that.
Yeah, so this has been a long process. The town agreed to purchase this property. We entered into a purchase and sale. I'm pleased to say that the purchase and sale was structured very carefully and written very well. And the reason was it's an old gas station. And although the seller had an LSP, a licensed site professional, that had cleaned the property up, or actually it was the previous owner cleaned the property up to the extent they could, there were still buildings and structures, including the garage, that was still on site, which means if there was contamination under those buildings, they couldn't tell and it hadn't been remediated. Long and short of it is the agreement that was struck through the purchase and sale was that the seller is responsible for removing all the structures. So there's a garage as well as a single-family home and a few small structures. Remove all those and handle any remediation. So when they did remove the garage that was closest down by the road, this is the property across from Dunkin' Donuts essentially, there was in fact contamination, and there was more contamination than anybody had anticipated. So under the purchase and sale, the seller was responsible for all of that. Not only were they responsible for taking care of the cleanup, but, as you've heard, talking about prevailing wages, and if the town had to do it, we'd be paying a premium, whereas the private sector, they're able to do it much more efficiently and cost-effectively. But that took considerable amount of time because it has to go through DEP. Everything has to be tested. Reports come back, and where things stand now is by basically the end of last year, beginning of this year, is even though the structures were gone, right? Then you saw a big hole get dug. That was the remediation, and then you're looking at it going, well, what's happening now? Well, what's happened now is that the seller has had to install several monitoring wells, and they have to continue to sample the groundwater. So one of the reasons why we did not move forward with closing on this property, even though we felt like we had a good handle in terms of the remediation that needed to take place, right? The big concern and the unknown was whether or not that contamination had made its way into the groundwater. If it had, that is a much more extensive and significant cost to remediate. So they've gone through that process. They've installed the wells. My understanding by the way, we hired a licensed site professional, an LSP, to watch their LSP and their contractor. So when their folks are taking samples, our guys in the hole taking samples. So, and saying, well, we should also probably sample over there. So it was a very good process for us. It just takes time. But we did our due diligence, and we certainly protected the town's interests. No doubt it has caused a delay, but at the end of the process here, we're better off for it. So the good news is, I believe 3 of the 4 wells came back tested clean. The 3rd has trace, but below reporting. So what we know is that if we begin our building project there, and we have to excavate, and there is dewatering that needs to take place, we'll have to sample that water, and if there's any traces of, even though it's below reportable, you can't just pump it off. We'll have to put a frac tank in there and treat it. So there'll be a slight additional cost. But again, this is within the parameters that we understand what potential risks we're taking on. So where things stand right now is we have revised the purchase and sale. The Board of Selectmen has signed it. The seller has signed it. And essentially what it says is they have to do 2 quarters, in the first 2 quarters of calendar year 2022, testing of the groundwater. And if it's all clear, then we will close around July, end of June, beginning of July, and the town will take legal possession of the property. One of the requirements is, before we take possession, is they have to decommission all those wells. And so then the town owns it, and we're on our way. What the chief and I have been discussing is we're pretty confident, based on the fact that the first round of testing has come back clear, that we are going to begin our process, which is hiring an owner's project manager. We're legally required to do that for any project over $1.4 million under Chapter 149. And then with the owner's project manager, we hire the architect, and then the architect gets designing. So we want to get that process going because it takes some time to go through that public bid process, but we want to get the architect on board so that we are designing and doing that work through the balance of 2022 and coming around and positioning ourselves to come back to town meeting in calendar year 2023 for approval at town meeting. And then because of the size of the project, it will require a debt exclusion vote, which means a ballot vote, which is the same process we followed for the library, the senior center, and the Lincoln Street Elementary School. And under our financial policies, any project of that magnitude is essentially exempt from the limits of Prop 2.5 because it's so large. But one of the things I want to draw your attention to is, if you look at the chief's 10-year plan, it goes out, you see that by moving things around and trying to structure them, if you look out, there's gaps here, 2027, 2028, where there are no projects coming forward. There's no fire engines, there's no large pieces of equipment. And again, we're trying to free up, actually in 2026, there's an ambulance, but that's paid for out of the ambulance fees, not out of the general taxes. So you got 3 years where good planning and coordination, we don't have any other large projects. It's just going to be that building project that's going to come in. Because again, we want to be sensitive to the tax impact, and we want to smooth it as much as we can. Just to kind of put it in perspective, when we approved the Lincoln Street building project, that was a $25.5 million project, which we got a $10.4 million grant for. So anyway, we bonded about $14.85 million, the town share. Our percent of our budget that went to debt service was down around 5%. It bumped up to around 7 and change, and now it's back down to 4%. So, it had a small impact. It'll have a tax impact for the first 2 years it's implemented. Then it becomes part of basically the tax base. And from there, it's declining principal, so it drops off. And so that's the plan. The timing of this is very well planned. We would have liked to have been in a position, a year ago, but much better to say, yes, we're going to move forward, and someone says, is the site clean? I know for a fact it's clean, and I can prove that it's clean. We weren't in that position a year ago.
John, question.
Yes.
There was some comment a year or so ago that the site would be including more than the Pierce property, something behind it. Is that off the table?
No, it's not. That's 10 Monroe. So we are continuing to be in touch with that homeowner. They're interested in selling. We weren't in a position to move forward with that purchase and sale till we knew that we were going to actually close on this property. So we are beginning those negotiations again to take that property. And again, the conceptual design for the station on that site would really have that station on top of that house. So the owner would like to sell. For us, it's a conflict that there's no way to mitigate. So if the owner is interested and willing to sell, the town is willing to buy it. And part of the way the site works is if we didn't buy that parcel, we'd have to put in a rather substantial retaining wall, which is going to cost roughly the same amount as to acquire that house. The other thing is, by acquiring that other parcel, we now own all that property, although the grade is very difficult, going all the way up. And there's potentially opportunity, either as part of the project or in the future, to add some municipal parking back there that would help serve the town common for events down there and so forth. So all that still needs to be worked out when we get the architect back and we work through the plans, but we are proceeding to purchase that. And the appropriation, the funding to do that has already been approved. So we're able to move forward. It's just a matter of reconnecting with that homeowner because obviously we've been on holding pattern for a little bit of time here.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any questions for me? Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you, Chief.
Thanks for coming in, Chief.
I always get a chuckle when we go to town meeting and people say, well, I can't believe we're spending, all this money on all this equipment, and it seems like it's being rubber stamped, and I have to explain to them, that piece of equipment that's being approved has been talked about and vetted, and grants sought for it for 6 years before it gets to town meeting. And when it comes to the town meeting, it's needed, it's part of a replacement plan, and that's why it comes forward with the unanimous support of every member of every board and committee. It's not, it's not elfin magic, and it sure isn't a lack of scrutiny or interest. It's just good planning, and it helps too when we get to town meeting, like we'll be able to do again this year, and be able to say these projects can all be approved and there's no additional tax impact. That's just phenomenal for us.
The radios for the chief got the grant for a perfect example of that.
Exactly.
We've talked about these radios for a long time.
Yeah.
They just stuck with it and got it.
I'll share, with regard to the fire station building project, I am in communication with our legislative delegation, and there's a lot of, as I said, capital infrastructure money that's becoming available. And we are trying, whether or not we'll be successful, remains to be seen, but we always try. We're trying to find an earmark through some of that funding through the legislature to offset the cost of the fire station. Fire stations are extremely expensive to build, and I always find it ironic that the fire station is one of the most expensive buildings you can construct and one of the most necessary buildings. It's our emergency operations center. However, I can get a grant to redo a school. I can get a grant from the state for a library building project, but I can't get a grant for a police station or a fire station. So one of the things that we're proposing, and actually at the meeting, the selectmen's meeting on Monday, we have our approving our legislative priorities letter. Well, there are some bills that we have been urging the filing of that would create potentially a grant program for municipal buildings like fire stations. And so if that occurs, we may be able to secure some grant funding. If we can't, and concurrent with that, we already had conversations. If you saw, there was actually on the front page of the Telegram and Gazette about 3 weeks ago, Danielle Gregoire, our representative, point blank said, yes, I'm well aware of the capital needs. In fact, I'm trying to obtain some funding for Northborough's fire station. So publicly, she's acknowledged that. So whether or not it makes its way through the legislature and we can actually see some funding, I don't know. But again, like everything else, at the point at which we go to the voters and we say, this is the project, this is what it looks like, this is what it costs. Well, I don't make the costs up. That's the market under prevailing wages. And I can assure you, we've exhausted every avenue for grant funding or earmarks or anything like that. This is what it costs, and it's necessary. And at that point, I think we've had a very good record of convincing the voters that it's the right thing to do. When you look at the Lincoln Street Elementary School, that's not a middle school where every kid goes through, or a high school where every one of our kids will go through. That's a neighborhood school. And we were able to show, and this committee was able to show, that through the planning, that building was due, its time, and we convinced the Massachusetts School Building Authority that we were all in unanimous support of that project. And that project was approved with 80% approval at the ballot and near unanimous approval at town meeting. And again, that's a neighborhood school. But that good coordination and good planning. And actually, I found out afterwards, there were projects that MSBA had approved ahead of our Lincoln Street building project. And those projects, when they approved them, couldn't get it passed at their town meetings and through their local boards and committees. And I found out from staff afterwards, I said, how did we get bumped up? And they said, really, when you came in and the town administrator is there with the superintendent and you've got certified votes from the school committee, from the financial planning committee, from appropriations, from the board of selectmen, all in unanimous support of this project, you're not going to get a much better chance of passing something at town meeting than that. So having that unified front through good planning and good information gives you a good shot at these grants. We can't guarantee it, but I can tell you it's going to be the best effort that we can make. So, and the other piece of it too is just driving home to people. Anytime you do a project that's exempt from Prop 2.5, and so you're asking people to voluntarily increase their taxes, there will be people who aren't in favor of that, and that's okay. But I think the distinction that we always make at town meeting is the distinction between you as an individual, whether or not you can afford it or want to pay for it, whether or not you value a library or a senior center personally, that's your value judgment, that's okay. But as a corporate entity, the town of Northborough, certainly at 4% of its budget going to debt service, can afford this project and arguably has a intergenerational duty to make that investment in its buildings and infrastructure. And that's a powerful argument. So.
All right. Thanks, John. Next item is our next meeting date, which will be a week from tonight.
So at your next meeting, we'll have Scott Charpentier coming in. He's going to run you through the DPW projects and the updated numbers on those, as well as the water and sewer capital projects. And we'll have the school department in as well, even though they don't have a project going forward to town meeting on the warrant. They do have a couple of projects that they're pursuing through the MSBA, the School Building Authority, for reimbursement, and that is the Z School roof and the Proctor School roof. So remember, the Proctor School roof, we replaced the peaked portions. They now need to replace the flat, and kind of like the conversation we just had regarding the 2 fire engines, the 2004 is in better shape than the 2005. Z School is in the capital plan, and Proctor isn't. And what they're really finding after they have a new facilities manager and they had a very detailed analysis done of all the roofs is that Proctor is in need, and those need to swap. At the last selectmen's meeting, they approved filing a statement of interest with MSBA saying, we need to do this project and we'd like to partner with you. And if MSBA approves it, they will typically pay for somewhere between 45 and 48% of the project. And this is about a $1.5, $1.6 million flat roof to be replaced. So we're hopeful, again, if we can show that it's in our plan and that we have the capacity to fund this roof, MSBA will hopefully be more inclined to approve it. They have more funding that's coming through as part of the money that's flowing through the state right now. So they've got more money. We're hoping that they'll put more into their accelerated repair program, which is roofs and windows and doors, that type of thing. And again, the only project, if you go back to this original spreadsheet that I gave you, and you look at in fiscal 2024, the only project that we have in there in that column against the ARPA funding, the second half of the ARPA funding that will come, is our share of that roof. So essentially, and we talked about this at your last meeting, an $800,000 fire engine and a $800,000 to $900,000 roof, our share of that roof, could get taken care of with ARPA funding without any additional tax impact. Again, all that means is that the tax impact to the residents, those 2 projects won't hit them at a time when the fire station building project would be coming through. So we're trying to be as sensitive as we can and plan accordingly. So the timing of the ARPA funding and this plan, we're really hopeful that the Board of Selectmen, that you will recommend to the board that this is the right approach moving forward. So.
All right, let's see. Is that it? Anybody have anything else you want to talk about?
I don't have any other business for the committee this evening. Just confirming your meeting next week, Wednesday, 6 p.m., DPW and the school department.
All right, very good. Entertain a motion to adjourn then.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? We're adjourned.